Hey, everybody. It is Tony Blauer, and I am back with. How many times have you been on the show, Ryan?
I think this is number two.
So you're like a frequent guest for me
I like it.
because I'm like compared to Joe Rogan, I'm so small time that if you've been on the show more than once, you're like one of our frequent guests.
Hey, it's an honor to be here once, so twice is even cooler.
This is cool, and within the same 12-month period, even though you were 2018, now it's 2019.
Yeah, and not only twice here on the show, but once in person at Spear Camp in Las Vegas.
This is true. And that actually gives me a perfect opportunity to segue into why the call and what we're going to do. This is a kind of a special edition of the No Fear podcast, mainly because we're usually audio. Even though I record in Zoom so we can see, it's always produced as audio. So Ryan came to my camp and did two things that really impressed me. One was he didn't just show up like a speaker, like a prima donna. Where's my trailer? I only want like red M&Ms. Well, he did only want red M&Ms. It was a little weird, but
you're not supposed to tell people I eat M&Ms.
Right. These are paleo, like not real chocolate and sugar. But anyhow, in all seriousness, guys, Ryan attended all the training and threw himself in there, and then I had asked him, and I got to find that clip you did when you had me on your show. And dude, I was so excited. Like I was following your countdown to Christmas. Honestly, it was like I won lottery that I was in your top 10 or 12, the 12 days of Christmas or whatever you're doing. That kind of blew my mind. I was totally taken by surprise with that and totally flattered and honored that your audience enjoyed that interview so much.
Hey, not only were you in the top 10, you were number 3.
Yeah.
You were our third most downloaded episode of 2018. So thank you for sharing such amazing stuff and putting things out that our audience and your audience can get excited about.
Well, and that was actually the inspiration of our ongoing dialogue and relationship and connection, because where this all happened was, and I got to get that video that you sent me outside where the cops stopped. So we do this, we sit down, talk, and there's of course no physical, no demo. And we get out and I'm about to say goodbye and jump in my car, and your partner and the crew are out there. And I spontaneously just start showing Ryan some of the drills that I consider like brain-based connections between the kinesiology and mindset and the relationship between the cross extensor chain and the flexor chain and finger splayed and outside 90. And I'm doing these drills. So we start doing like a bit of the spear flow drill. And what that looks like, if you're doing it properly with a modicum of intensity, it looks like the beginning of a fight that might go to the ground, right? And so here we are doing this, I think between two parked cars just off the sidewalk on the road. And all of a sudden we hear like, hey, is everything okay over there? We look up there and it's one of the local PDs that stopped. And what was exciting to me is this is one of the things that I always say to people we train, that, old Roman legion Maxim, training should look like training should be like a bloodless battle. So the battle is just like bloody training, that you should be replicating what you're doing so that if somebody didn't see that you're wearing high gear or that you're in a dojo or mat room or in a gymnasium, that if someone walked by quickly, they might think you're really fighting. And so to have two cops stop at a 4-way intersection and get ready to jump out and kick the shit out of you, Ryan, because I think you were about to beat me up. It was pretty fucking epic.
It really was. It was really cool. And to your point, I mean, I don't care what you are preparing for, whether it's business or sport or self-defense. What you just said, I think, is one of the secrets to life, that our training should be more difficult, more strenuous, more taxing than the actual event, because it's then, it is that preparation that helps us succeed in the real event. And none of us want to have to use self-defense in the real event, but the reason you do it is so that should someone need to, maybe it's the difference in life or death, literally.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. What's interesting is if you decide to become a lawyer, you do scenarios in a fake court, right? And you run through that. If you're a doctor, you're working on cadavers, you're replicating the operations you may need to do to save somebody's life. And there's that type of simulation training in almost every bit, like good business type school or activity, but there isn't. Here I am generating more haters because of a unconscious bias and misunderstanding. There still isn't in 2019 a deep understanding of what replication training is and how, and this will tie us into the purpose of this call, how if you can visualize this, guys, when you're in great danger, your body's limbic system, amygdala, reactive brain, hijacks your cognitive brain. And the degree that it hijacks it with, and for the duration it stays hijacked, is going to be proportional to how you've stress inoculated for that event. So if you have never done like true ambush, counter ambush scenarios to experience what goes on emotionally, psychologically, and physically, then your adaptation time is much longer. Where if you've done scenarios so I've done stuff where I remember having a scenario where I was going to have 4 people attack me in full gear. And this is back in the 80s. And I remember thinking, it was almost like this is pre-Sherlock Holmes when he visualized, the slow motion, what he was going to do here. But that was what was going through my brain. And I was doing the seminar in front of a bunch of my students and guests. And then it was my turn to go and be the defender. And we had continued to amplify each iteration. So it was one-on-one, a couple of times, different people, different sizes, different scenarios, 2-on-1, 3-on-1. And so I was going to do one. There was, multiple sailing against me. And my I was going to say it wasn't confidence. It was my arrogance and my ego as a 28-year-old, guy pioneering self-defense training was like, I'm going to fuck these guys up. And here's what I'm going to do. Now, understand this is what we call a jack in the box moment, where I don't know who's going to attack me where or when. These guys can plan it and strategize that. So all of this is like, I'm doing this thing. This is, again, pre-Sherlock Holmes. If you've seen the movie where he visualizes the fight in slow motion and then it happens, and it happens just like that. So here's what happens. They come in and they start, and I get my ass fucking kicked, right? Like, I don't win this. Everything I thought was going to happen didn't. And what it was, it was, and understand, we're not also, for people visualizing this isn't like putting on equipment and then dancing around and sparring. And when we do our scenario training, we replicate an event. We replicate a location. You're at a bar, you bump into the wrong guy, this happens. You borrowed money from a loan shark, they want their money back. So we put people in these scenarios, Ryan and everyone listening, where they can't really be themselves. Like, so if, let's say you were a kickboxing expert, Ryan, I might have you sit down and be on a bus, right? So I've eliminated your go-to moves, and somebody sits down beside you and says, hey dude, move over so my buddy can sit here, and you're like, hey man, like, I already got this. So like, you got to start a conversation, right? And it fucks people up. It gets inside their mind and takes them out of the sparring mindset. Anyways, back to my story is, it took these guys about 2 minutes to get me to the ground and just pummel the shit out of me. But that was the education. I was humbled. I realized that fighting 4 people wasn't like a movie, that I didn't sweep the leg, like in the movies. And it was doing stuff like that for over a decade that gave me this insight into, and this is where I'm going to introduce my good friend Ryan Munsey and his explanation of why the spear system is important, but not just from and Ryan's not on my payroll and he doesn't get any money, that he actually went through the training and actually adapted and rewrote part of his presentation after learning more about the training, so that it was not only supportive of the information, it was consistent with his background and research. Because what I realized in 10 plus years of doing scenarios, Ryan, was that the complex motor skill that I thought I was going to do was not available to me, because fear and emotion had hijacked me, and I went from the ability to access a fine and complex motor skill to the need to apply and use primal gross motor to push away danger. And the stronger the engagement for my threat, trying to get me in a headlock or a bear hug or drag me into a makeshift van or alleyway, that relationship between pushing away danger and danger trying to get control of me was the relationship where the cross extensor chain, the finger splayed, and all of that. But I'm going to let you explain that from a scientific perspective.
So let's do this before we jump into the slides. I mean,
please.
Everything you're talking about, like, my mind is just filling with some stories that we can tell, and there's so many examples in what you just said of why this system works, and I want to highlight a few of the things that you said, and these will be things that come back up as we go through the slides, and these are the exact same slides. They haven't been touched since August.
Do you want me to hit
play?
We were in Vegas?
You
want me to hit play?
No, you don't have to do that yet.
Okay.
Well, that view works. I can see those.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say, to your point about the fight, and we may have a plan as to what we think we would do in any situation, and I think this speaks to one of the brilliant aspects of the SPEAR system. And we'll talk later about Hicks' law, and basically, if you're not familiar with that, Hicks' law states that the more choices we have, the longer it takes us to make a decision. So
nice.
The thing with the SPEAR system is there's only one choice, right? It's don't get hit in the face, and then push danger away, step back, and go from there, right? So we'll break all that down later. But to your point, and the story that I wanted to tell is this is something that I am wearing a purple shirt. It's my Clemson Tigers shirt. We won the national championship last night.
Nice.
So I'm on cloud 9 from that. But the very first possession of the game last night, and the reason that one of the biggest reasons that Clemson won that game last night against Alabama was that Alabama made mistakes. And in a survival situation, in a high performance situation, in business and sports, whatever your thing is, whatever domain you want to apply this conversation to, the bigger the stage, the more the little things matter.
Right.
And if we are to have success, if we're to be high performers, if you're a law enforcement or Navy SEAL or whatever, it's all about doing the little things right and doing them right when you're in adverse circumstances or situations. And so Alabama's quarterback threw 2 interceptions last night, and those 2 turnovers directly led to touchdowns for Clemson, one on an interception return, one on the following drive. Both interceptions he threw, he anticipated what the defense was going to do, but he anticipated incorrectly. They showed him one thing, they did something else. So rather than reading and responding to the situation, he acted based on what he thought was going to happen. And what the training in the SPEAR system does, and again, like I said, the SPEAR system gives you one option, right? And that is only having the one option is an advantageous situation, because we're using that startle flinch response, and you're only doing this, and then we're weathering the storm and we're moving on to step 2, step 3, and so forth. And this is part of the reason that I wanted to do the training, because I've never done full speed or real life simulations of this stuff before. And if you look at Navy SEALs or law enforcement or SWAT, they go through thousands of repetitions in a kill house. If you are an athlete, how many practices have you been through in your life? If you're a college or a professional athlete, how many times have you been to practice? How many times have you worked on your technique for a free throw or a golf swing or whatever? It's all about repetitions. And if you're in a survival situation, or if you're working on self-defense, I mean, could you say that you've done even a fraction of those repetitions? Or business, anything that you want to have success in, how many repetitions and not just going through the motions, but it has to be deliberate practice and intentional. And this does something that we're going to talk about again later. The more we get those repetitions, what we're really doing, and in all those scenarios with spear training, what you're doing is, whether it's on a bus and you've taken away the kickboxer's legs or whatever, you are building data points. And it's these data points that we can pull from. When we'll talk a little bit later about the dopamine and pattern recognition processes and how they're involved with recognizing certain situations and situational awareness. But really, all those repetitions, all those different simulations build data points. And the larger our bank of data points is, the more we have from which to pull when we go through this superior pattern processing, which is one of the things that sets the human brain apart from anybody else, or any other organism. It's one of the things that they're struggling to replicate with AI. The AI can compute so much faster than the human brain already, but what it's lacking is, that pattern recognition. It's getting a lot better, but that's the sticking point.
Well, if I can inject something to that. So what's interesting is the way we do scenarios and this whole replication theory, and I've been writing a lot about it online lately with my posts on scenario-based training, is it's almost like metaphoric AI, in that, like, if you don't put the right information in the computer, it doesn't matter what pattern recognition system and what data points you have in there, because it's gonna guess wrong, like the quarterback did, right? He had the wrong data points there, and or not the wrong ones. He picked the right ones at the wrong time. In another scenario, it might have been a touchdown for them. And so what we've done is created a system where we analyze how the bad guy moves, and we call that the be a good bad guy model. And the idea on be a good bad guy is that whether you're a cop, whether you're military, whether you're general public and you mind your own business and something happens, the bad guy influences your movement. He influences it at an energetic level, right? If I say, "Look out, Ryan," and you believe that, you're going to start to flinch, and so someone's throwing a punch, slinging a bullet, whipping out a knife, whatever, all of that, the movement, the intention to action, stimulates a movement, a physiological response in the person who thinks they might get hit, the anticipation of danger. And so when we do our drills, we're applying this interleaving metacognition. It's almost like, I never thought about it this way, but it's almost like this synthetic AI struggle where I go, the bad guy is the artificial intelligence. We're saying he's going to move. Do we all agree that this attack would look like this? And then we do that attack over and over again. And what we're doing is we're creating mental blueprints in the defender's brain. And because our system is Hicks law compliant, what starts to happen is you're improving perception speed and decreasing reaction time, so that you're mitigating fear and how fear can override your survival requirement to stay in the fight. Because we've got fight, we've got flight, and we've got freeze. And I want to talk about that for a second. In our system of self-defense, the generic definition of fight, flight, or freeze is not adequate for me and my integrity as a coach and as a trainer. Because the fight or flight from the caveman, perspective, is that fighting was totally primal because you didn't want to die. Flight was totally primal because you didn't want to die. And freeze was totally primal because you thought if you played dead that maybe you weren't going to die, or you're just like some animals, just like you just lock up because they know they're dead. I want you to, when we talk about in our education, how to choose safety in a confrontation, and choosing safety should not be and cannot be confused with playing it safe. You don't win at life by playing it safe, but choosing safety could be charging the threat. Choosing safety could be barricading yourself. Choosing safety could be playing dead. But all of those things need to be responses, not reactions, which means our cognitive brain needs to be involved. And so, in short, what I've worked on for almost 4 decades is a way to respect and recognize that our reptilian brain, our survival brain, is going to do things regardless of what we wanted to do if the stimulus is appropriate. And we need to get our cognitive brain to embrace that and integrate that so they both work harmoniously to affect a safe outcome.
And that's the exact reason that we need repetitions. We need that stress inoculation, as we called it earlier. The first time you jump in an ice bath, you're going to respond differently than the 10th time you do it.
Agreed.
I hope nobody ever gets held up at an ATM 5 times, but
Right.
I would imagine that the 5th time, if it ever happened, that your response the 5th time would be drastically different than the first time.
Right.
You want to get those learning reps under your belt before the actual stage on which you need to perform. And again, in self-defense or personal safety, it's not a stage that any of us ever want to find ourselves on, but let's be prepared if we do. So go ahead.
No, I was going to say something really interesting because like these are trigger points for me. My family likes to tease me. They refer to me as this ironic snowflake because I get really sensitive about this stuff. Where I go like, how do you inspire somebody to practice something they subconsciously, consciously, unconsciously hope they never have to use? In other words, there is a fundamental resistance at a cellular level, I hope I never have to use this. So, how do you motivate people to practice that? And this is kind of a rhetorical question. And if you have an answer, but it was like, you made me think about this. Is like I know that if I'm a football player or if I'm going to be a lawyer or if I'm in business, that I need to be able to handle this rejection or this confrontation or this scenario. But
I think that's a universal question, no matter what your area of expertise is. It's a struggle that we all face. So my degree is in nutrition. I've worked with thousands of people on diet. I used to own a gym. I've worked with thousands of people in the health and fitness realm. And what I've had to realize over time is that I can't make somebody do something they don't want to do.
You can't.
I can only provide the information if somebody is ready, willing, and at that point in their journey where they're saying, I'm ready for this information, I'm ready to do the thing. So I think, to answer your question, the rhetorical question, I think as much as we may want to be able to help everybody, it's just not realistic. Right. I think the answer is you just keep doing what you're doing, and the people who are ready to receive that information will find you. It's that old saying of the master will reveal himself when the student is ready.
Right. Feel the dreams, build it, and they will come. And it's a combination of that. No, I dig that, and I appreciate the answer. And it is hard for me. It's frustrating because I know many people confuse self-defense with martial arts. And I was telling a story yesterday, popped up in my head of 2 women who had signed up for a self-defense course I was giving back in the day. And on the way back in when I used to live in Montreal, this is back in the 80s, my original school was in the basement of an industrial building, and there was no public transit to get there. So you had to get off at the corner and walk about a half a mile to get to the school. And they got mugged on the way to the self-defense seminar. And I called everyone on Friday. It was like, hey, you had 24 hours to cancel, exclusive, 12 people only. It's like 10:09. They're late. I'm telling the class, hey, they should be here any minute. I spoke to them yesterday. They're coming. I finally reached one of them because they weren't answering their phone. And I said, hey, we need to start. Are you nearby? They go, start without us. We're not coming. I was like, well, okay, that I'm not giving your money back, right? No refunds, like inside 24 hours. And they're like, that's fine. I go, can I ask why you're not coming? They go, we got mugged. And I start laughing on the phone. I'm like laughing at them. And I go, that's one of the best excuses I ever heard. I'd never, to tell your self-defense instructor that you got mugged on the way there, I'm not giving you a credit. Very creative, but you're not getting a credit. They go, no, seriously, we were mugged. And we talked for a little bit more. I invited them in. They didn't want to. They were so scared of what had happened. They got scared away from. Now, I turned to the group and I told them what happened. There were 10 people there. And I said, if I had pulled the trigger on deciding that I was going to learn more about self-awareness, fear management, verbal de-escalation, and personal safety, and I invested in this course, and I got mugged, I experienced violence on the way there, that after I got through that, I would run to the course and go, clearly I suck at this because I just got attacked, right? Like, I need to learn more. For many people, it's hypothetical, so you can live in your bubble and you go, that happens to other people. But when it happens to you, so I was kind of blown away that they didn't show up. I understand it was probably a little too fresh, but anyways, off on a rant. Let's unless you want to set this up anymore.
We can jump in and I'll set this up the same way I did when we were in Vegas. And, I think I said it that day when I spoke, and I'll say it again. I was incredibly fortunate that you slotted me on day 2 instead of day 1. That gave me day 1 to experience Spear system in person and go through a lot of the drills, talk to some of the coaches, talk to some of the people who have been to. I was blown away at how many people at the camp were repeat trainees or campers, whatever you want to call them. Yeah. And so many dedicated fans. It was really cool to see, and or followers, whatever you want to call it. But
it's a cult. Basically, it's a cult. It's not practitioners. They're cults, and a lot of them are on drugs. But,
so I got to sip the Kool-Aid then on day 1,
right?
And and I think I said this at the beginning of my presentation that on day 1 I was very nervous about speaking to that group because I didn't have experience in a martial art or in the self-defense world, and that fear quickly went away when I redid the slides on that evening, because what we are talking about already, what we ended up talking about on day 2 when I presented, and what we'll go through now, is the fact that if you understand human behavior, psychology, physiology, emotion, all of those things, fear response, it's universal. It doesn't matter what the domain is. And an understanding of that gives us tools that we can use in any situation. So all then we did on day 2 when I presented was we just tailored that to what you guys are doing and what I was able to learn and experience. So it's more of that. It was, day 1 for me was building my bank to pull from, right? For that pattern recognition. And then it's just, this is how easily that stuff.
And I want to inject something before I cut you loose on this thing here, and that is when that incident happened after our initial podcast, the one where I actually was number 3 in the world of most downloaded. I just wanted to point that out again. I actually want a recall of the lottery and of the voting. I just want to see if there was any irregularities in the number 1 and 2 votes there, Ryan. If you could, we'll talk about this after the show. It was something. It was what you said to me. Why I wanted to invite you to the camp is after I did the demo, you so succinctly explained what was happening between the myelinization from the training, the neurotransmitters, and you put it in such a succinct way. I was like, dude, I gotta get you. And that'll come out in this talk here. So I just wanted to, because I forgot to mention that, because I want people listening to this, and many of them are law enforcement, military, martial artists, self-defense practitioners, CrossFitters. Why did I want Ryan? Here's a guy who's never done this. Why did I want him there? It was his ability in.
You showed me outside 90 finger splayed to demonstrate how the Spear system worked. And when you were explaining it, I immediately said, finger splayed works based on irradiation. And so when we get to that slide later on, that's what I explained on the street. Then you were just like, oh, let's build on that.
Right. And so for everyone listening, what I wanted was, very often you get people who, again, don't realize that my singular focus for almost 40 years has been just finding ways to make people safer. And I believe having subject matter experts outside of my cult, because the people are like, oh, you're just a fanboy. No, this is fucking science, right? You should want to enhance your personal safety and the safety of your family, the people around you, or whether it's your employees, your staff, everyone should be safer. If the world's safer, then you're just safer. That's the whole true safety mantra. But why, when I invited Ryan, I knew he was going to do some of the drills, and I had him go on day 2. I know that part of my human weapon system theory, and I can't articulate it like somebody who studied neuroscience, but I know that the body has this hardwired response to danger that I figured out how to weaponize using Pavlovian classical conditioning drills, creating in that metacognition process. The attack's going to happen like this. You're going to do this rep like this. We build the physicality by embracing and incorporating the physiology. Whereas the conventional approach to learning martial arts and self-defense is you adapt to the stylistic expression of this art form, and you've got to learn these complex motor skills. And they're beautiful and amazing. And I've been a martial artist I'm 58 years old now. I've been a martial artist since I'm 7. So over 50 years, I've been studying some sort of martial art. But I was able to, at a young age, around the time I was 20, had my epiphany where I realized my martial arts study and my self-defense study, while they share certain platforms and movements and trajectories and angles and kinematics, they were completely different emotionally, psychologically, and physically. So let's jump into this, your connection here on everything from fear and breathing to irradiation and why this system. When I tell people this is the strongest position that you can hit, regardless of whether you're female or male or experienced or not. And hopefully Ryan's going to be able to provide some scientific evidence for that.
Yeah, I mean, we'll show the science of it, but I mean, I think nothing trumps experience. And I mean, your coach, Dan, both of them are very strong and very large men. And for somebody like me who was giving up somewhere between 30 and 60 pounds to either one of them, right, and having zero experience and being able to use this system on my first day of learning it,
right,
to get them off of me I'd say if it wasn't full speed, it was 90%.
We call it real speed, because someone can go, well, I could go faster than that. Well, for people who sit on the fence, or for people who are just contrarians, who just like feel like they're building themselves up by putting other stuff down, we use a lot of CCTV dashboard, body cam, and real evidence. And real attacks don't happen at the speed of a UFC fighter, right? You're not warming up like 3 hours before your fight doing pad work, watching film, right? This shit happens opportunistically. And so what we do is very, very different. And it'll make you safer whether you are a UFC fighter or you're a beginner. And so in your course, I mean, there were over 100 people at our camp, Ryan, but what we didn't mention is that a lot of these guys there that were freaking close to 300 pounds to little women. And the job and role of my mobile training team and my cadre is to help people. What's the best word I'm looking for? It's almost like an archaeologist rediscover this internal power that you have. Because in a high stress situation, what you have is physiology, physics, and kinesiology. You may not have access to, the toolbox from the martial art, or in many cases, most people don't even have a toolbox.
Right.
I also want to point out that the drills you did with Danny and Dan are both full-time cops. I mean, so their intensity on impact when they did stuff, also unconscious to them through osmosis, had a different level of aggression than if, let's say, you partnered up with another, 30-year-old guy who it was his first time there, and he's giggling and going, "Hey, I'm nervous. I haven't done this before." And you're like, "Me too. Just grab me." Right? There's a different emotional. In the first place, we are hit in a confrontation as our emotional system, whether it's performance anxiety or deeper.
And I can speak to that, because that's exactly what Dan did. Was, he used me as the example and said, let's do it with that intensity, and the voice, the tonality, the inflection, just the way you say it, and like the placement. And when he grabbed me and threw me up against the van, and he had his mouth was like right in my ear, and he's like, "Give me your wallet, motherfucker!" And like
Right.
I could feel, like, I still remember that visceral feeling of
Right.
like the scruff on his face rubbing against my neck, like. And I had an emotional, a physiological response from that I didn't get from somebody just saying, "Oh, I'm going to grab you and say, like,
Right.
hey, I'm give me your wallet." Like
that's part of the three-dimensionality of the training. And one of our maxims for the system is behaviorally inspired. It's genetically wired, and if you follow this metaphoric algorithm, it'll make you safer sooner, because it's this blend of physiology, physics, and psychology.
Let's roll through the slides.
Okay, let's do it. You just tell me next or now or next. Anything on this intro slide, or go?
So I kind of gave the same intro that I did there. So we could probably skip down 4 or 5 slides.
Okay.
Yeah. So we talked about this.
Chef or cook? Do you want to talk about that?
So
it's kind of a good metaphor.
We can talk about that. Yeah, it is. I like this a lot. And,
I dug it.
When I talk, I always ask this question. It doesn't matter, what the demographic is or who I'm talking to. I like people to ask themselves this question: are you a chef or are you a cook? And in order to answer that question, you have to investigate the difference between the two. And for the sake of brevity and to move forward, the answer is a cook has to follow directions to take a recipe and turn it into a meal. On the other hand, a chef can look at a recipe and use that as inspiration or a jumping off point, and they could throw the recipe out and they could present to you their own version of whatever this thing is that they were inspired to create. And that requires ownership of information. And so that's why this is placed where it is in this conversation, is to preface what we're doing and to get people thinking along the terms of becoming owners of this information so that you can apply it however you need to or want to. So that's what this one's all about.
And the progression is intuitive, natural. You cannot start off saying, I want to be a chef. You're going to start off cooking shit using somebody else's recipe, and eventually you get to the point where you have ownership.
You have to learn the rules of baking and other types of cooking. And, same thing. If you want to become, a maestro on the guitar, you've got to first learn chords and progressions and whatever. And then you can become, this virtuoso. But first you have to learn the basics. And then when you master and own that information, you can bend it and shape it in a way that you want. So
dig it.
Yep. And so then that's the next slide is building on that. True ownership of knowledge allows us to transfer that knowledge across domains. And in this specific conversation, the knowledge is, what is human behavior? What is our physiology, our psychology, understanding physics? Those are the pieces of information that we want to have ownership of. I promise you, if you can take ownership of human behavior, there's nothing that you can't do.
Right on.
And then that's the next couple of slides.
Right.
Understanding human behavior transcends any specific application. So whether we want to use the analogy of special operations or law enforcement or business or sports, whatever. And then the next one is it's kind of building on the same stuff. This is exactly what I do. I think we've talked a little bit already about, my background and platform. So I think the big thing here to take away is, again, if you can master your mind, that there's nothing you can't do.
Dig it.
And then the next one.
Yeah, before you do, and if you don't have Ryan's book, you should get his book. Okay. A little shameless plug for you. We'll talk.
I appreciate it. The book, if you don't know the book and you're not looking, if you're driving, don't look down. The name of the book is Fuck Your Feelings.
Fuck Your Feelings. Okay, stand by. And that's how we came actually to be, is I saw the book, started reading it, when it was holy shit, and contacted you. But next slide.
Okay, so, always want to think in terms of problem and solution. And in this sense, the problem for me and in presenting this information was, in a lot of ways, personal safety is an acute scenario. And it is the opposite of what I coach and what I talk about in the book. Because in the book and in my talks, we're talking about human behaviors and long-term patterns. What we do with consistency over time determines the trajectory of our life. And my book pertains to non-life-threatening situations. So again, this was about taking that base foundation of knowledge and then tweaking it and applying it. So again, as we've already touched on, we all have the same biology and we all have the same physiology. So we're going to take that and we're going to apply it to acute scenarios that require accurate decision-making regardless of how we feel. So instead of, hey, my alarm went off at 4:30 and I don't feel like going to the gym or I don't feel like going to train, it is, holy shit, I'm in a life or death situation. How do I control my mind and make the best decision for my or my family's survival? You mentioned earlier going through choosing safety, and we'll get into that thought process or the matrix as we go forward in the slides. We'll talk about polyvagal theory, but the example that you listed or some of those choices of, is the best decision to barricade myself into a closet? Is it to run? Is it to fight? Those choices and the choices that we make in those decisions or in those moments require us to think not with emotion, but with logic and with ration. And that's not something that you can do if you haven't prepared to think that way under those circumstances.
Right. There's also an interesting component and I got to see, our instructor course, which you weren't able to attend because of your other speaking engagements and stuff. Whenever you want to jump in and do the full thing, let me know, come as my guest, because we get into a whole element of what I call the 3 I's: instincts, intuition equals intelligence. So we come at it backwards, where what you just said, agree with 100%, but then there's these black box moments where you go, I got a really bad feeling about this. And that's on the other side of that door, or that's that person in the crowd there, but I don't really see any evidence yet. How do we take instinct and intuition and make that an intelligent choice? And that's all about blending that and understanding the psychology of fear, not the physiology of fear.
Yeah, I mean, to me, a lot of that is also something that you and I have talked about several times, and that's situational awareness. Think about when you watch a movie, right? And you see, like, I don't know, you see a person walking down the street. I think you guys actually showed some CCTV videos of, there was somebody walking around they were coming down the street, and there was a guy kind of hiding behind the building that was on the corner, and he jumped out and he cut her off. And, the situational awareness thing there is, and when we see this in a movie, we're like, why are you even there?
Right.
Why are you walking down that street? Like it's like the most apocalyptic scene,
right,
in terms of like bombed out buildings and run down. And it's just like, if you don't have to be there, and we don't know her situation, maybe she had to be there, but I think it's that intuition. And if you get those feelings, like, pay attention to that. Like if you don't think you should be on this side of the street, cross the street now. Don't wait for the next crosswalk.
That's the whole choose safety thing. Very fun. Cool, man. Next.
So again, just really setting the stage here for what we're about to go through. And human physiology is universal. I don't care if you're Asian or South American or male, female, practiced in martial arts or not. I mean, if you are a human, you have the same physiology. That is a universal thing. So performance and personal safety are expressions of the same underlying operating system. And again, if we can understand that operating system, it allows us to transcend any specific application. If you understand physiology and physics, you can manipulate for baseball or golf or whatever, any kind of human performance. So go to the next one. Okay, so this is where we really start to get into some of what is in the book and then how we apply it to what we are talking about here with personal safety. And we really just touched on it a minute ago, and that is, if you're in a situation of duress, you really need your mental faculties to be very sharp, and you need to be thinking in a way that is going to enhance your survival capabilities, not putting you at further risk. Feelings are mental experiences of physiological states. That is how neuroscience defines a feeling. And I talked about this in the book. I was able to do some research and collaborate with a researcher at Cornell, actually, and we talked a lot about this. And this is how they define feelings. This is not my definition. But what's really cool about this definition is that if you understand physiological state is the same thing as body state, right? So if we change the state of our body, we can change the state of our mental experience or our feelings. And if you don't believe this, there's a slide coming up where we're going to practice it with breathing. And that's kind of proof of concept. But another proof of concept or another example would be to stand up and do 30 jumping jacks, or to do burpees, as many as you can in 60 seconds. I'm not saying they're the best exercise in the world, but I promise you, your physiology will be different in 60 seconds than it is right now. It's the same reason that if you sit around in a car or a plane all day long, you feel different than if you were outside in nature hiking for an entire day, right? Body states dictate mental experiences, and that's what a feeling is. So next one. Yep. So what we just said, if you're able to if you want to change your mental state, all you have to do is figure out how to change your physiology. And that could be if you're a desk jockey and you're sitting at a desk all day long, like if I look up and I see myself in the picture, I can kind of see starting to hunch over, and just remember to, extend and open up and take a deep breath into my diaphragm. Now, it's a postural check, it's a breath check. And if I hold this position, I'm in a different place with my mental feelings and capabilities than if I sit in a submissive and, less happy looking position, right?
Have you thought about this? This all makes sense in terms of every other event than sudden violence. And I'm being the not the contrarian or the devil's advocate, but just somebody who has had 30 years of people saying, well, but I would just do this in that situation. And we have a maxim in our scenario training. We got a bunch of them. And it's profound. It's everything works once, it doesn't work twice. Everything works once, it doesn't work twice. So we'll take somebody, do some sort of demo drill with them. Their complex motor skill is bypassed. They do something primal gross motor. Because they don't have a bunch of reps in converting that, they end up kind of messing it up. Their performance ego is embarrassed by it, and then they go, well, do it again, I wasn't ready. Or they want that do-over, and I go, you don't get a do-over. Okay, in baseball you get 3 strikes, right? Or in football you got this many you don't get that in the street. And so we created the maxim, and I'll tie this back to what I heard you say, because remember, what I'm also trying to anticipate what people in the self-defense sphere are going to interpret this at is, if I hear somebody banging at my door and I go, shit, this is a home invasion, my first reaction might be to go fetal, to get scared. I now situational. My self-awareness is a direct component to my situational awareness. Mm-hmm. If I can't have those two work together, if you got shitty self-awareness, you're going to have poor situational awareness. Mm-hmm. I can use a breathing exercise, a mindset exercise, a state change to ready myself for a imminent danger. But I don't have that gap when it's that luxury when it's immediate danger all the time. Are you tracking where I'm coming from here? It's like,
right.
if I'm so if
and so I think that's where the spear system is so beautiful, because you in that phone booth sized environment where you don't have time, you get the startle flinch reflex,
right,
and then you buy yourself the time to take that breath, calm the limbic system. And with practice, it's the repetitions of practice, not only in these training environments, but also in what you do in your other times of, do you do ice baths? Do you do breath work? Do you do all these other tools that we could list that help us shift from limbic activation to prefrontal cortex running the show? That those are the repetitions that help us flip the switch faster in the spotlight, whether you're playing for a national championship and, stuff goes awry, or it's personal safety or whatever, or business. But it's with situational repetitions and also the foundational practice of, whether it's, like I said, cold water or breathing or any of those things, that the more we do that, the faster we can make that switch, the easier we can bridge that gap.
That's a great answer, Ryan. And that's one of the things that and it's amazing that you answered it with physiology as opposed to academics, right? Because some people go, well, yes, but no. But the reality is, if a stimulus gets introduced too quickly, you don't have time to do any breathing state change, deliberate. Hey, I've been here before. It's okay, because if you stab me again, I'm going to fight back. Things are happening so fast that the startle flinch, that metaphoric airbag deploys, and we know that's the neuroscience. It deploys. Your brain catches up and goes, oh shit, primal gross motor, this works. I've now created some workspace by pushing away the danger. I can now, in that moment, go, holy fuck, this works. That creates a dopamine hit of, hey, this fucking works. I'm back in the fight. Now you naturally do the, and you're back in there.
Right.
Okay, dig it.
And the secret is to be able to, when you create that gap, is to be able to make that switch and move from emotional to logical.
Dig it.
Yeah. And then, so, we went through some exercises. One of my favorite ones, and this is one of the ones that within usually 3 to 4 cycles of breath, somebody notices a difference in this, which is why we use it in the examples, to show proof of concept, to be able to move from a sympathetic state to a parasympathetic state. So a note on breathing, I know there's a ton of information out there. Oxygen Advantage is probably one of the best books. Greg or Patrick McEwen, Oxygen Advantage. Can't remember the guy's name. But anyway, the thing to remember with breath work is that the inhalation is an excitatory or a sympathetic action. It's the exhalation that is the parasympathetic or calming portion of this. So a lot of times when people are stressed, we'll say, take a deep breath. And what we should actually say is, let it all out, or exhale long and slow. So if we want our breathing to move us from sympathetic or activation, fight or flight, to parasympathetic, and when I'm going through this, I'm talking in non-life-threatening situations. And again, as we just said, the more we practice this in non-life-threatening situations, the better we get at training our brain to go from fight or flight to thinking logically in moments of high stress, whether that's personal safety or sporting events or whatever, right? So for parachute breathing, what we would do is a sharp inhalation through the nose for about 3 to 5 seconds. And we would follow that with a long exhalation through the mouth that is about twice as long. So we would shoot for maybe 10 seconds out. So I'll do one round just so you can kind of hear what it sounds like, but it would be, and then you probably can't hear this, but I'm slowly exhaling through my mouth, right? And if I have a mic on and we're in front of a room, I can guide people through this. But what I would suggest is, if you're a listener and you want to try this, then do that. 3 sharp inhalations through the nose, 3 to 5 seconds, exhale through the mouth for about 10 seconds. And if you go through 3 to 5 cycles of that, you'll probably notice a state shift. You will change your physiology, which will change your mental experience or your feelings. And that's something that we can do. One of the reasons I love breath work is you can do it anywhere. You can do it on a plane. You can do it while you're driving in traffic. You can do it, wherever, whenever. So that's just a cool proof of concept that we like to run through.
Yeah, and I just want to mention something about breathing. We all take it for granted. You and I are having a fascinating talk. I'm digging this. We were talking a little bit before I started recording, and I was like, "What do you want to do?" And I was like, "I don't know. Let's just start talking." And it's fucking great. I'm really enjoying this, and everyone listening is going, "Wow, this is really good." But if suddenly all the oxygen got sucked out of my room right now, I wouldn't continue talking to you, Ryan. I'd be fucking freaking out, as would everybody listening, right? And so we take oxygen for granted, and learning all these new. We right now are in the golden era of breath research. Whether it's my buddy Brian McKenzie, Belisa Vranich, her book Breathe, Brian's Art of Breath, The Oxygen Advantage, Wim Hof. Everyone, you should explore all of these things in the same way you should explore all martial arts and find shit that you enjoy and play. Just don't confuse scenario-based training and the biofeedback you get when you realize that you just did this like 10-second exercise anaerobically because you held your breath because the scenario was so realistic. And you want to understand, what breathing protocol, because all you need is a sip. Think of it as you're drowning metaphorically, and you can just get your lips to break the surface of the water. All you need is a fucking sip. You don't need to hang out there and float on your back, right? And so this is what I mean, like in that survival area, and we're getting down a rabbit hole, so I want to stop myself here. But explore the stuff, heed Ryan's advice, and learn about deliberate breathing. It'll change your life. It's changed mine. Cool.
Yeah. What's next? Okay. So, why did we do that? Like I said, proof of concept. Understanding the system gives us the ability to control, use, manipulate it to our advantage. Again, this goes back to that early slide of, are you a chef or are you a cook? Ownership of information. So it's exactly what you kind of pointed out there with the disclaimer. Don't try to parachute breathe if you're being attacked at an ATM. Like, that's not the time to parachute breathe. Right. Okay.
Just for people watching this, just a quick layperson's explanation of CNS and autonomic central nervous system.
Yeah. Central nervous system. Yep. And autonomic nervous system was once thought to be the portion of our nervous system that we did not have control over. So generally speaking, like, we don't tell ourselves to breathe. Like, we can breathe without conscious thought to that. However, the proof of concept here is that with conscious, deliberate practice, we can take over and control the autonomic nervous system. And that's what the breath work and, like you mentioned Brian McKenzie and Art of Breath and Wim Hof and Oxygen Advantage. That's really what is so cool about all of those practices, is that it is a method of controlling what we once thought we could not control.
Dig it.
So we did a quick kind of crash course on feelings. If we're saying, hey, that a feeling is a mental experience of a physiological state, why do we have them? They are very primal. They're older than our executive brain. They do serve a beneficial evolutionary purpose. Otherwise, they would not have made it through evolution. So there is a purpose. They are not inherently good or bad. I'm not saying that we should completely ignore them. But what we do need to understand is, what is that purpose? And let's make sure we are allowing them to serve their function, but not overstep their boundaries. And it is dysfunctional regulation of those systems that can lead us astray long-term, and also in an acute personal safety situation. Feelings serve as a red flag. We take in so much information on a daily basis, even more now than we ever have. And even in evolutionary times, they served as a signal marker to say like, hey, slow down, pay attention to this thing. There's a reason you're feeling this, right? So they're meant to direct our attention. And so an example that I love to use is if we are walking on a path in the woods and we see a snake. And so then this speaks to the speed of feelings and the speed of something called the limbic system that I think we're going to get into in the next slide or two. But if we were walking down a path in the woods and, you know, you, the listener, or I am kind of person one, and then we're walking down with somebody else, and we see the snake before the other person does, our immediate response is going to be to stop moving, and our arm is going to go out in front of the person next to us and stop their forward progress. And that physical response happens faster than our verbal communication can say, stop, snake, right? And that is a beautiful example of the speed of the limbic system and how these primitive parts of our physiology work so much faster than the things in our executive portion of our brain, which is where the verbal communication skill set lies. And another example, you know, again, my background is in nutrition. So a lot of people would struggle with, say, like, let's say you walk past the bakery at Whole Foods and, you know, everybody says, oh man, those cookies smell so good. And then the secondary response is, oh, but I don't eat gluten, or, oh, but I'm on a diet, or fill in the blank. But those two reactions are natural. And, you know, not to go off on a tangent on diet, but, you know, a lot of people would beat themselves up for having that first reaction, that first response. And the thing that we need to realize is that that is completely normal.
Right.
What we have control over is whether or not we heed that feeling. You don't have to eat the cookie. There'll be other cookies. You know, or you could, you know, if a guy's, you know, or a female sees an attractive member of the opposite sex, there's an initial reaction, and then there's a, oh, I'm not an animal, I'm not going to respond based on animal, right, you know, tendencies. Right. So, you know, those are some examples of limbic system versus prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is significantly slower, and there is a little bit of a lag time there. And again, this fits into what we're doing with the spear system, because the limbic response is the startle flinch. It's getting up in the spear position, buy ourselves the time for the prefrontal cortex to kick in and take over and use rational thought. And again, the more we control, or the more we practice switching from one to the other, the better we get at long-term control over our decision-making, becoming the version of ourselves that we want to be, but also being able to perform in stressful and adverse situations.
Dig it.
Cool. So that's basically what this slide is. We can probably go through this pretty quickly because I think I just mentioned a lot of it. But again, the limbic system, it is incapable of thought beyond the now. It's like the ego-driven teenager. The prefrontal cortex, however, is capable of abstract or creative thought. It's the wise old sage. And then, there we go. There's your application for personal safety and high performance. You use the startle flinch response, you weather the storm, and then you switch to prefrontal cortex control.
So guys, listening to this, you're visualizing this, you're driving, you're lying down with headphones on. You know, the conventional way, and I'll dial this back to self-defense specific. And you guys hopefully can hear my puppy in the background barking. But stand by one sec. Everyone pause. Everyone stop driving. Hey, sweetheart, I'm recording a podcast. Should introduce you to the new member of the house. Bought the wife a puppy.
Nice. Christmas present?
Christmas birthday. So the conventional training SOP, standard operating procedure, typically goes, hey, when you do this, I'll do this. Get me in a headlock, throw a punch, tackle me, kick me here. I'm going to do this block. I'm going to do this punch. And so you develop this very Pavlovian relationship, stimulus response driven. In between stimulus response is a gap where your brain kind of downloads the right response. Oh, when he does this, I'll do this. It's kind of like a writing DOS statement, if then go to. And that's what Ryan was talking about. That takes a little bit longer, where the limbic system just moves. And so I remember I was doing a weapon defense seminar. We were working with some knives. I'm talking about some stuff, and I see these two guys standing, and they're kind of like, buddies with each other. And one of them, we had set up this sequential drill to practice what we call clear control counter, had very specific, strict, steps. Don't do this too fast. I want you to do this slowly and methodically. This is the energy I want, but it's going to be clear. It's going to be control. It's going to be counter. We're going to do this over and over again, X amount of times. And I said, any questions? No. And I said, okay, grab your partner, spread out, and start going. And as I break them, this buddy is standing here. I'm going to step back a little bit. As this, I'm going to make a little knife here. They're holding their blades. And he turns and looked at his buddy and just slashes at him, like just like being like a buddy dick, like in a seminar. And his friend, I'm going to move the screen here so you can see this. So his buddy goes, you guys ready? And he goes, yeah. He slashes at him, and his friend goes, and he just like hollows out, and his hands comes up, and he gets into a stance. And a bunch of people see this, and they laugh because he flinched. And I stop, and I go, that might be the best thing you do all seminar. Enjoy that. He's like, what? I go, like, that was just your body responding to danger. Now you can catch up with your cognitive brain, and now you're thinking clear control counter. But it was that spontaneous surprise attack that actually triggered a real flinch in a synthetic environment. And so, I just wanted you guys to visualize this relationship where you understand how, if you're intelligent with your drilling and you understand these concepts, you can stimulate a limbic response and then have the prefrontal cortex. So our cognitive brain starts to work with our reptilian brain harmoniously to choose safety. Little hijack of the conversation there.
That's good stuff.
All right. Polyvagal.
All right. So this is what you were anxious to get to earlier when we were talking about choosing safety. So polyvagal theory. And this is some really cool stuff. I'm trying to think about how to condense this. So polyvagal theory was posited by a guy named Dr. Stephen Porges, who was the same individual who discovered that we have a variation between heartbeats, and that science then became known as heart rate variability. So if you're anywhere in the fitness or health world and you've heard HRV, heart rate variability, that is all thanks to Dr. Stephen Porges, and again, same guy who posited polyvagal theory. So basically, polyvagal theory states that poly meaning many, vagal referring to the vagus nerve. So this was maybe 30 or 40 years ago, maybe it's been 50 years now. There was debate in the scientific community as to what the function of the vagus nerve was. And there were two kind of conflicting hypotheses. And Dr. Porges said, you know what, you're both wrong. Or he said, neither of you are wrong. You're both right. It actually goes both ways. So the vagus nerve is actually it's a two-way nerve. Most nerves are either afferent or efferent, meaning they carry information either to or away from the brain. The vagus nerve actually carries information in both directions. And it's called the vagus nerve because it meanders. The Latin comes from Latin close to vagabond for meandering or wandering. So it actually innervates almost everything from the brain down, through the visceral organs. So if we talk about gut-brain connection, literally that connection is the vagus nerve. So heart rate variability, to oversimplify it, is the amount of time that we spend in a sympathetic fight or flight versus parasympathetic rest and digest state. So, this breath work or cold exposure or yoga, meditation, any of these things that can serve as recovery are also things that move us from a sympathetic to a parasympathetic state. They're also things that can help us. The more we train them, the more we again, shrink that time gap that it takes to shift from startle to logical prefrontal cortex thought. So with the polyvagal theory, Dr. Porges points out that we basically have three responses to any situation, and there's a hierarchy. So the first and most primitive and oldest existing option is immobilization, literally being scared stiff or getting in the fetal position. And then we develop the sympathetic response, which is fight or flight. And then the third is to use cognition. So, we could talk about examples of that would be like if you're in a bar and you bump into somebody and spill his drink, and then the guy wants to get in a fight, your immobilization response, the lowest response in polyvagal theory, would be to drop to the fetal position on the floor. The secondary response would be to either run or fight the guy. And then the third response, the newest that we have developed as a human, is verbal communication to de-escalate the situation and use cognition to avoid a fight or a confrontation or otherwise choose safety.
What's if I can interject here, and you probably remember this was the seminar, but people who've trained with us or studied our stuff, this is interesting because, my whole system, I'm not educated like you are and other people who, the system was built on my intuition and studying violence. Mm-hmm. And we created three connected transitions from the startle flinch, and we call them primal, protective, tactical. Mm-hmm. Primal is what your body wants to do prior to any training. Protective is now you've got some more situational awareness. You realize that you're in a fight and you're trying to push away the danger. And then tactical is you've got kind of radar lock. You go, I need to fight. I need to move. So primal, protective, tactical actually sequences and mirrors this immobilization, fight or flight, and cognition transition, even for our physiological phases. I just wanted to throw that in there. Interesting.
Yeah, and to what you said earlier about self and situational awareness, this is the next line here in red. The key to high performance behavior and decision making, whether it's personal safety or any of the other domains that we could list as examples, is awareness. The
right.
key is awareness, and that involves or includes both self and situational awareness. Yeah. What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What is available to me in this situation, and being able to quickly get beyond the emotional response to then go through that decision-making matrix is what will either save your life or protect your family or, help you make the right decision for your business or your team or whatever. And so, again, going back to ownership of information and understanding human physiology, this is inarguable. This is our human operating system. And like we said earlier, if we're able to understand it, then that gives us the ability to control it and make it work for us rather than allowing it to control us.
Amazing. Good stuff, man.
So at this point, we kind of shifted into, the SPEAR system and human behavior. So I think this is where we get into, I think the next slide is kinesiophobia. Yes, it is. So that's a really cool word that basically means the fear of movement. And how it applies here is less of the literal translation, fear of movement, and it's more of the, there's a less literal translation to, we fear situations that we don't have plans for.
Right.
So if you don't have a plan for personal safety, you are more likely to fear that situation or more likely to use one of the lesser evolved options in the polyvagal theory hierarchy than you would be if you had a plan. Right? The saying is, fail to plan is plan to fail. So always have some sort of answer to, will you be ready? And usually when you say, will you be ready? People say, for what? Well, exactly.
Right. We have a fun motto. If you can't think to do it in training, what makes you think you'll think to do it in the street? And,
right.
it's the same thing where part of the exploration is sitting there Socratically, not trying to make somebody look good or make somebody look bad, and go, well, what is possible versus what is probable, and then can we safely, scientifically replicate that in training so that we get those data points?
Yeah, and so this kinesiophobia, it's could also call it like scared stiff. Like we said, it's the lowest expression of that polyvagal theory. It's very rarely the ideal choice in any scenario. And it's exacerbated when we don't have a plan. So we want to avoid situations where our own lack of plan creates immobilization or the freezing that actually facilitates the undesirable outcome. If somebody wants to rob you and you freeze, your odds of not getting robbed go down.
Right.
And so, that kind of the segue there into the next thing is that having a plan, and this is a question that I always pose, and it's fun to hear the responses, and we'll get into the difference later. But the question is, does having a plan reduce fear, or does it reduce anxiety? And that it actually enhances our odds of a successful outcome. So think on that for a minute as you listen to this. Does having a plan reduce our fear, or does it reduce our anxiety? And we'll get back to you with the answer in a couple of slides. So then we talk a little bit about high performance. I think for the sake of time, Tony, let's maybe skip through this one. Yeah, we can skip down. Keep going. Keep going. Let's go. Yeah, we can keep skipping these. So now we're going to get into kind of the nitty gritty of why the SPEAR system works. And I think this is, for the sake of time, let's just make sure we elaborate on all of these. So, again, we've talked a lot already about understanding the system, both the system of human physiology and how, like we said, if you can understand it, then you can manipulate it or use it to your advantage. It's ownership of information. So it's just human nature to startle or to flinch. I don't care who you are. You've got that great video of Muhammad Ali flinching.
Right.
And he goes straight into the spear position, which is amazing. So we will flinch. I don't care how trained you are. If you walk around the corner in your home and you're talking on the phone and you're not expecting your child or your wife or somebody to jump out and scare you, you're gonna flinch. And that's not like an ego knock. It's to say, let this work for you, not against you. And the final thing there is, whether it's sport or business or confrontation, speed wins. So use this to your advantage. And I think, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, just let's insert something on speed, because that's one of my favorite questions too, and comments when people in the combative DT martial art community, when they think of speed, they're thinking of non-telegraphic motion and how fast you can punch or kick or block. And I always define speed as speed of recognizing you're in danger, speed of recognizing and addressing your fear spike, speed of choosing the right option. Right. And you said something interesting earlier about fight or flight. We want flight to not be a physiological response, but to be a tactical choice, because your cognitive brain said, let's get the fuck out of here. Right. And you're running on purpose, not running in a panic into a wall or into a dead end.
Right. No, that's a great point. And I'd also add the speed of that flipping the switch or transitioning from emotional response to prefrontal cortex, thinking through the situation, making a rational decision.
Right.
So the question we asked a minute ago, does having a plan reduce your fear, or does it reduce your anxiety? And the answer is anxiety, because of what we're about to talk about here, the difference between fear and anxiety. Fear is the presence of a threat. Anxiety is the anticipation of a threat. The threat is not actually present. If the threat is not present, it is anxiety. So a lot of people will say, oh, I don't swim in the ocean. Well, maybe that's not a good example, but like they say, like, I don't want to go through, if I go hiking on a trail, like I have a fear of snakes, or I'm afraid that there's going to be a snake on the trail. Unless the snake is actually on the trail, it's anxiety. It only becomes fear when you actually see the snake and it is within, 5 feet of you. And so there's some interesting science on how anxiety and fear change our behavior, not just in an acute setting, but long term, and even in such a long arc that it can affect generations to come. So the quote from one of these studies was that pathological anxiety interferes with the ability to cope successfully with life challenges, which is just, I mean, to me, that's most people on the surface, you'd say, oh, well, yeah, I get it. But I mean, stop and think about that. And if you're somebody who, I don't really want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but just be aware of where your anxieties lie and whether or not you are allowing them to derail you from the path that you want for your life. And again, this is why the book was called Fuck Your Feelings. I don't want people to allow their pathological anxiety to interfere with their ability to create the life that they want for themselves.
And I want to take a moment because this is so deep and so potent and so profound, and you're right on. Pathological anxiety. I remember when I was about 13, I cut my hand open with a knife at camp, and I went to the infirmary, and the doctor, who, of course, he's a real doctor, but he was probably upset that he wasn't like running a big hospital in a major city, that he was a doctor at a summer camp for kids. And so he took his job really seriously. And I don't know, I hope I didn't insult anybody out there. I'm just talking about this guy, because he looks at me and he goes, "Oh, I don't think you'll need sutures, but definitely a topical antibiotic is going to be prescribed for this." And my buddy, who was the counselor, who was 16, he goes, "You mean cream, doc?" And like, he had to use the word topical antibiotic and sutures. So I was scared shitless, like trying to decode this as a 12 or 13-year-old or whatever. And, oh, you're putting first aid cream on. Okay, that sounds a lot better. So, Ryan's quoting here, and he's obviously really educated here. I just want to change pathological anxiety to be a condition where you really, let's say, you don't like the job you have, but you stay in it for years because you're afraid to make that shift. And it's this, like, there's no snake, but you've chosen a lifestyle or a lack of direction because you think there's going to be a snake every step of the way on opening your gym or becoming a self-defense instructor or quitting your job or whatever. So, I mean, am I right? Am I right with that?
No, you're absolutely right. And that's such a great way of breaking it down. And, pathological just means chronic over time.
Right. It just, because if I said to a lot of people, if I just said, "Hey man, how's your anxiety levels these days?" Most people go, "I don't have anxiety," because it's like a taboo thing in certainly if you're type A macho, but in society, that we think about, like, things about, so we use two acronyms in our psychobehavior: false evidence appearing real and false expectations appearing real. And what we're talking about is when you're visualizing an event that hasn't even happened and it's debilitating you in the future. So you're hallucinating something, it's debilitating you in the present. So you're hallucinating something in the future, it hasn't happened, and it's impacting what you want to do today.
Yeah, and the very next couple of bullet points on the slide actually show exactly that from a scientific study that was done on rabbits, that fear can not only change behavior in an individual or a group of individuals, but in their offspring, and therefore impacting the entire species. So I know this is rabbits, and they'll somebody somewhere will be like, "Oh, this doesn't apply to humans. It was a rabbit study." But just listen to this. Rabbits are known for their reproductive prowess, right? Like, to the point that, like, we say, like, getting it on like rabbits or, whatever, right? So
you can swear.
A specific group, of rabbits was exposed to a predatory threat, right? I don't know if it was a wolf or coyote or whatever, but if you think about that, reproduction is meant to perpetuate the species, right? I mean, from a biological standpoint, that's the point. And what was fascinating was that they discovered that after exposure to the threat, the rabbits actually had a 40% reduction in reproduction. And that just shows you how fear can create an irrational response, because the rational response would have been exactly the opposite. Holy shit, we are threatened. We need to have as many offspring as possible so that we can set our species up for greater success of survival. But instead, they had fewer reproduction. So again, understanding and mastering anxiety and fear and their response allows us to use that to our advantage, and specifically to prevent it from derailing our performance, our decision making, and ultimately our goals, whether that's in an acute setting or chronic and long term.
And you got a 40% greater chance of having more sex if you master this.
That's always a good thing too.
Yeah. All right. Good stuff, man.
Okay. So here's the slide that gets into irradiation and what we were talking about on the street. This is the one that started everything. So, you showed me finger splayed, and we were talking on the street about the difference between finger splayed and them not being splayed. And with my background in weightlifting, I'd read some stuff from Dr. Chad Waterbury and a lot of other guys who taught some really great things about nervous system activation to increase strength output and performance. And this was stuff that I just geeked out on for years and always incorporated into my training and programming. But it works on the scientific principle that that's just how our nervous system is wired. Greater neural activation results in more motor units firing. And if we get more motor units firing, we get more muscles firing. More muscles firing simply equates to a greater expression of strength. So what you have, I don't want to say stumbled onto, because that I think downplays what you've been able to do over your career, but what you've discovered, is that finger splayed uses a principle of irradiation, and it creates greater strength. There is science behind this. And, if you go to the next slide, we have learning by experience again. So, what we did at the seminar, and what I would encourage any listener to do if you want to experience this, is find a partner and shake hands with them. And just notice your grip strength. So when you do it, go ahead and try to, give it the firmest grip that you can do. And then pause and do it a second time. And the second time you do it, I want you to make a fist with your non-dominant hand, your left hand that you're not shaking hands with. I want you to tense your abs. I want you to flex your glutes and shake hands again. I promise you will notice a difference. And the difference is irradiation. And the next few slides, I think this is where it'll be important to have the visual, because what we do is we really get into, the anatomy and the physiology. And there's some visual examples of what a muscle fiber and muscle bundle looks like. So on this one, so here's a motor unit. And what we have is a motor neuron that has branches of neurons that then innervate the muscle fibers. And we have, it's a cross section of a muscle. And so if you were to take a cross section of your muscle belly, say the bicep, what you would see is a lot of individual kind of cables, if you will. So if you've ever looked at like a cable bridge, like the Golden Gate Bridge, for example, it's not one thick rope. It's a whole bunch of little ones that are in a bundle making this larger one. So if we get more of those to fire, we can produce greater strength. And an example of that would be if you punch slowly, right? So if you actually go through the motion of punching and you do it slowly, you're going to recruit neurons and muscle fibers to do that. If you do the exact same thing as fast as you can, you will recruit significantly more motor units and more muscle fibers. And that is because of what it's the intention. It's the intent in your brain. So then the application of this outside of personal safety is like with strength training, right? So a lot of times in dynamic effort movement or rate of force production training, we're trying to move the bar or move the load as fast as we can which creates greater muscle motor unit recruitment, greater muscle recruitment. And, we don't need to go off on a whole strength and conditioning tangent, but the thing to remember here is that more neural activation equals more motor units firing, which equals more muscles firing, which equals a greater expression of strength. So that is the physiology behind finger splayed. I think the next slide.
I just want to throw one thing in there on the finger splayed for people watching this. The serendipity of the SPEAR system, again, the acronym spontaneous protection enabling accelerated response. When a stimulus gets introduced too quickly and your body deploys the startle flinch, your fingers splay as part of that 80,000-year-old survival reflex. It's way, the reflex has been around for hundreds of millions of years, but I say 80,000 years specifically because that's when modern man began roaming the earth. And I start my date time from when I hypothesized that mono conflict started between tribes. Before that, we didn't fight each other. We needed each other for survival. So don't send me an email going, 80,000 years. We've been around for hundreds of millions of years. I don't need to know. Yeah, it's a 2 million year old brain, blah, blah, blah. So this is just my self-defense hypothesis. But what I need you to understand, you can visualize here, is that when I flinch, I don't flinch with my hands closed, clamped into a fist. I flinch with my hands open. And that's important. So we're cycling back here. And now, Ryan, pick this one up here.
Yeah, so this was just continuing on the nerve bundles and the innervation. So I think go down one more. Yep, so this is the one I was looking for. So this is up one.
Oh, sorry, this one here?
Yes. No, up, not down. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
31, I think. Yeah. So that was Sherrington's law of innervation. And that's what we're talking about there and what we were talking about on the street. So he was a physiology guru, and he discovered this. Down one more, Tony.
Yep.
Yeah, there it is. Charles Sherrington was his name. And so that's the scientific principle, if you will. It's Sherrington's law of irradiation is what it's known as. And that's what we were just talking about. More neural activation, more motor units firing, muscles recruit nearby muscles. So that's what we're looking for, both in the strength and conditioning world, but then also applying it to personal safety here. So,
take it.
Yep. And so then, outside 90 is the second component.
Right. So people new to this, some people new to the SPEAR, there's two cues that we tell people. When you flinch, you're typically off balance emotionally, physically, and psychologically. But the sudden danger is actually locked and loaded your close quarter arsenal. And what we're doing is we're capitalizing, we're exploiting, we're converting the startle flinch and weaponizing it. And the two cues are keep your fingers outside 90, keep your fingers splayed and get your arms outside 90, and then follow your torso and hips, follow in and move towards the threat. Counterintuitive, and that's why you do the drills. But, and I just wanted to set the stage for that visual.
Yeah. So outside 90 works for two reasons, and it's physics and biomechanics. And so this was really cool to get to kind of do some research on this and, build it into
this is great.
The camp. And so if you look in both nature and architecture, an egg and an arch are two of the strongest structures. In architecture, the arch is an incredibly strong structure. And an egg, if you've never seen this, there's a demonstration or an experiment where people will say, hey, put an egg in your hand, a raw egg, and try to squeeze it. And people are blown away at how much pressure can be distributed around that dome of an egg. If you're squeezing from all sides, it's incredibly strong. Now, if you just take a finger and you poke it, and you have this direct pressure, it's nowhere near as strong. But what we're actually talking about here is that an egg and an arch are both made of multiple angles that are greater than 90 degrees. So you have a structure that is made of a series of outside 90s, and that's what results in their strength. So, Tony, if you go down to the next one, that's where all the kind of the nitty gritty details are on arch strength. So basically with an arch, pressure is dispersed and distributed, and that reduces the stress on individual components. So again, that's why an egg can't withstand anywhere near as much pressure if it's just one spot pressing straight down. But if it has the ability to distribute and disperse that stress, then the entire structure is stronger. So what we have is essentially a little bit of compression that can give, and it spans a large area, resolves those forces, and disperses them, and it eliminates something called tensile stress. So this is actually referred to something as arch action. And as the forces in the arch are carried to the ground, the arch will push outward at the base. So if you imagine like an old Roman aqueduct that is still standing, you had the pressure on top pushing down, the arch would disperse that force, and then at the ground, it would kind of push outward. And that force is called thrust. So in order to maintain this arch action and prevent the arch from collapsing, the thrust actually needs to be restrained, either by internal ties or external bracing, such as an abutment. Okay, so if you look at this old Roman aqueduct, and that was the previous slide. So as you're just imagining this, you have one arch abuts the next one, and then the next one, and it continues to go until you reach, like, if you're spanning a river gorge, then you would reach the mountain wall on either side, some immovable object or whatever it is that you're using for architectural stability. But what's cool about outside 90 is that when we get that blade edge of our forearm up against the opponent or the aggressor, that their body is actually the abutment in the arch of our elbow that is outside 90. So the fascinating thing here is that if our arm is out in that spear position, if we're outside 90, yes, the irradiation gives us strength, but it actually becomes stronger when it's up against the other person and not floating out in space. So the other person, and if the aggressor were to apply force into our arm at outside 90, it's actually strengthening that arch or spear shape.
Interesting. And it's, this is specifically or especially evident when we do our weapon control stuff, where we're always talking about pinning. Once we've controlled the arm limb, we pin the arm and the forearm to our hip or to our leg while we move into other moves. And you can just visualize this, that if, for those of you watching the screen, if I grab my wrist here and I'm fighting, with this person, I got all of this movement. I don't have that abutment. So when you pin it against something and you're holding it, it stabilizes everything. And there's just this very, very obvious change in muscle recruitment and stability there. So of course, real fights are dynamic and fluid, and you're not going to be standing like a bridge. But what Ryan very effectively did was show there's a reason why when, and I use it slightly differently, just because I've been teaching it differently for decades, is that most attackers are using their flexor chain to try and get in control of you. They grab your hair, they grab your throat, they grab your head, they're pulling you in. The startle flinch really is predominantly an extensor chain movement. It's pushing away. When the two of them come together, there's this immovable tension there, not literally immovable because it's slightly dynamic. But I've done this with people way bigger than me where I said, no, finish the headlock or finish the tackle or finish the bear hug. And it's nearly impossible. Also, the serendipity of it is the flexor chain burns out. The muscle atrophies way faster than the extensor chain, which is an interesting observation, which I don't have like a scientific answer as to why this pulling energy gets weaker faster than this extensor. And it might have to just be tied to it's our survival system, like pushing.
Yeah, it absolutely could be. And I think if you go to the next slide, I think that's where we actually start to talk about exactly what you just said. It's leverages and something called the link tension relationship. of the bicep and the tricep. Bicep there being the flexor, tricep being the extensor. So link tension is an
Nice.
isometric force of a muscle, and it depends on its length when it's tested. So muscle length is obviously dependent upon joint angle. If you flex your knee to a smaller than 90-degree angle, the length of your quadricep is going to be longer than it is if your knee is fully extended and your leg is straight.
Right.
And so when our muscles slide, we get something called actin and myosin overlapping. And so if we think back to those slides previously where we were looking at the muscle bundle, it's not just one long cord. We have a bunch of smaller ones that kind of sit slightly overlapping. And then as we contract, they overlap further. As we extend, they overlap a little bit less. And what we're looking for here is that Goldilocks position, that just right, when we're looking for link tension. And it just so happens that the elbow joint's angle of peak torque is very close to mid-range. It is actually just outside of 90 degrees.
Dude, you have no idea,
right?
When you said that at the seminar, I got goosebumps again now, because I've always just told people outside 90, outside 90, outside 90. And we do this demo on 90 and just outside 90. And the muscle recruitment is not 10x, 100x in what happens. And it's because, and I never knew the language to this, but it's the link tension relationship at that point.
Right.
And then
so
there's also, and I want you to, if you can, riff on this a little bit. When the bicep, tricep are engaged outside 90, what actually, because I do one demo where I square off and one where I have the person blade slightly, and I explain to them that outside 90 is recruiting these muscles, but what happens is now the forearm actually starts to participate with the tricep and the bicep, and now the lat and the rhomboid start to, and I think you used it in a slide earlier, that what was the language you used, but the nearby muscle activates.
Yeah, so yeah, exactly. Muscles activate nearby muscles, and if you can get, let's just throw out random numbers. If we get 5 muscles working as opposed to 2, we're going to be able to generate more force, right? And so the other thing there is at being outside 90, we're at the angle's peak torque position, and we're also in that arch structure. So then if we get under 90, then the joint or our arch is actually in that collapsing position. So if you were to see an arch anywhere in architecture and it was under 90 degrees, it would not be able to support the same load. If it were asked to, it would collapse. So, these extensors are unable to overcome that pressure or the force, once we've started to collapse under 90 degrees. So
this is fantastic because one of the things, and I was just on a call with a big law enforcement agency today, and we were talking, and they wanted to host a seminar. They sent one guy out to do an evaluation, come back to an after action, and he said, "Man, he says, I got guys here who are, professional MMA fighters. They're in law enforcement. They freaking love it. They're open-minded enough to see it. They got female officers. They've got." He says, "How do we set up a seminar for our own organization?" And we were just yakking, and I said, if I called you up before you experience finger splayed outside 90, and I called you up and I said, I've got something, it's one move, it's 2 cues, and it will help protect you in a car accident, a headbutt, a gun grab, a tackle, a haymaker. You could then get tactical with it, move through a crowd, knock, I said, would you believe me? He said, absolutely not. I had to go through it. So it's just exciting to have, I'm just thanking you. It's exciting to have what would be administratively referred to as white paper, with my air quotes for people listening, like white paper support for, me just saying from 30 years ago, just get outside 90, trust that it's going to be stronger,
Yeah. Yeah. And it was really cool to be able to kind of do the research on, why this thing that I had experienced, was so effective. So
cool.
Yeah. And this last slide here is just more of about the angle of peak torque. that is where the angle is at its greatest joint strength, or it is the angle of greatest joint strength. And of course, it's going to vary from joint to joint. It depends on the moment arm, length of the muscle, normalized fiber length, a lot of different variables, tendon
Right.
stiffness, muscle stiffness, and of course, neural drive. That's the big one. Yeah.
Explain neural drive a little.
So that's what we were talking about earlier with recruitment of motor units.
Okay.
So a motor unit is a nerve bundle, right? So nerve and neural drive would be like, we could talk about efficiency or maximum recruitment. And again, like the example is throw a punch slowly and then throw a punch as fast as you can. That's the greatest visual and experiential example of neural drive. There's very low neural drive in throwing that punch slowly. Neural drive is incredibly heightened when we throw it quickly, because it's about intent. It's rate of force production. How many nerve bundles are you recruiting?
Beautiful. Anything else? We've kept people super long, and I appreciate you probably missing appointments.
I was going to say, I do have to get on a phone call here. So we touched on Hicks law earlier. We touched on dopamine and pattern recognition earlier. A lot of that plays into, why Spear system is so effective. I mean, you have one option, and it's utilizing the body's natural fear response. And dopamine pattern recognition is just, what we talked about earlier with exposing yourself to as many scenarios and variables as possible, so that you have that bank to draw from, and that's basically what we would call experience, right? So, if you're a freshman quarterback.
Hey, you just cut out for a sec. Right after you said freshman quarterback, that's probably your other call going, Ryan, where are you?
Yeah, I had to hit decline on that. So, yeah, so it's experience is another way that we would phrase that, right? So if you were a freshman quarterback, people would expect you to have, you would make freshman mistakes because you don't have the same amount of experience. You don't have the same number of repetitions. You have not been exposed to the same number of environments or scenarios as a fifth-year senior has, right? And so I think that just speaks to the importance of the ability to build our data point base for pattern recognition.
Yeah, this is huge, and I don't want to keep you because you've donated so much of your time for people. But just to wrap up from my perspective, that is why you said it earlier. But hopefully you'll never be mugged or attempted kidnapped or attempted murdered, right? And visually, but what you want to do is how do you create experiences and then find a safe and scientific way to replicate these drills so that your emotional system can get to the strategic, to the executive function as quickly as you can. And it's not an binary, if I'll just do this, or jiu-jitsu is best, no, taekwondo is best. It's really recognizing that we all have this 2 million year old brain and 80,000 year old survival reflex that's been cultivated, since cavemen started fighting each other from tribe to tribe. And I think what Ryan did is an amazing job of adding this extremely scientific, but with also layperson examples here of why outside 90 finger splay, startle, flinch is like the connective tissue that would make you safer if you just open your mind and adopt it. So, Ryan, thank you so much for this. Do you have any closing words or thoughts?
No, I think I got cut off again. No, I think, we've touched on it a lot already, and I think it's just a matter of, I'd go back to that original question of, are you a chef or are you a cook? And what is your level of ownership of all of this information? And, just because you can cook with a recipe one time doesn't mean you're a chef forever. I would challenge myself. I try to hold myself to this standard, and would challenge anybody to take the route where, I think it's a quote from Stephen Pressfield, and I love the book Turning Pro. And he says, amateurs do it until they get it right. Pros do it until they can't get it wrong.
Nice.
So I guess that would be my closing thought. And that, again, that applies to all domains, not just personal safety.
I was just going to say, we're not talking about technique. We're talking about tactics. We're talking about life. And don't confuse the technical with the tactical. Dude, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Let's see. Social media, Instagram, at Ryan Munsey _. Podcast is Better Human Project. And website, ryanmunsey.com.
Nice. And last year, last question, do you know who came in number 3rd most viewed podcast, just offhand, like who it was?
I think it was that Tony Blauer guy. Do you know him?
Yeah, I don't know. I heard about him. He's a karate guy, right? Okay, man. Hey, you be safe. And hopefully this will stimulate a lot of thoughts. And if we get some cool questions, we'll get you back on again.
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks for the opportunity, Tony. This is always a blast.
This is awesome. Thanks, buddy. Be safe.
All right. Talk soon.
Take care. Bye.
Later.